Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the webinar presented by the Anti-Racism Committee and the Black SIG. Today, we're talking about current issues impacting Black scholarship in the AHRD, the relevancy of a race-based epistemology in the field of HRD. So the problem that we are exploring today is, and before I go any further, I am Marilyn Bird, professor, the University of Oklahoma. My colleagues are?
Hi, I'm Dr. Shonda Scott, and I'm a professor of human resource development at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan.
I'm Dr. Terrence E. Montbia. I am a professor of practice at Teachers College, Columbia University.
I'm Juanita Johnson-Bailey. I'm a professor at the University of Georgia.
Hi, I'm Nicole Dillard, and I'm assistant professor at HRD at the University of Minnesota.
So today, the problem that we are exploring is intellectual and epistemological racism. So the problem that we have identified is how the lingering Eurocentric hegemonic view and mindset of what constitutes legitimate knowledge has ignored and dismissed Black scholarship as being less than equal. And this mindset represents intellectual racism. Intellectual racism contributes to epistemological racism, which is the resistance and the refusal to accept race-based ways of knowing in a field of study. The impact this has left is anti-Black racism in research, theory, practice, and education with an emphasis on teaching has been ignored. The purpose of this webinar then is to explore the impact. We will critically examine and engage in conversations about race-based ways of knowing and anti-Black racism. We will explain the need to integrate a race-based epistemology into the human resource development body of knowledge. Again, emphasis on research theory, practice, and education with an emphasis on teaching. We will then at the end amplify our voices to increase the visibility and highlight the contributions of Black intellectuals in the Academy of Human Resource Development. So the guiding questions for this webinar: what is the relevancy of research on a race-based epistemology to the field of HRD? How has the extant literature on race and anti-Black racism contributed to a better understanding for the need for anti-Black racism approaches? And again, keep in mind, we're emphasizing theory, research, practice, and education with an emphasis on teaching. So the Black intellectuals respond. First, Dr. Juanita will talk about theory, and she will pass it on to another colleague.
So in the 33 years that I have researched issues of race, it has been, for me, a necessity to add that voice to the field because it was missing. But personally, it has been a way for me to understand and survive and, in a sense, to resist. Okay. It is not advancing. Okay. Advanced too much. So when I talk about race, it is, in my research, has been just a journey, a way of searching in the educational arena that we're in for people who look like me, to include the full story. Because if you aren't bringing in race, if you're not bringing in various positionalities, you don't have a full story. You're not doing real research. You're doing segmented research. So I deal with the constructs of gender and race. And race, for me, has been an accompanying hierarchical system. And I come with the understanding that it disparately influences the lives of many. So my research has been about looking for ways to understand race, to honor the culture, to preserve the voice, and to respect the participants. So I'm looking with an empathetic lens. So for the most part, I use Black feminist thought. And Black feminist thought has, for me, has forged an outlook. And it says that my daily living in this white society that is racist and sexist has produced a collective consciousness. And this collective consciousness, which is manifested in my research, resists being defined as less, resists being stereotyped. And therefore, that lens in looking at my participants and examining issues of race is, of course, extended to my research. I also use critical race theory. And the central focus of it, of course, is looking at race and racism. It is a overt challenge to the hegemonic discourse that exists in the field. It also, another tenet is that it has a commitment to social justice. So often in research, you will see that an empathetic lens is not used in looking at the other, not honoring the experiences of the other, and not respecting the experiential base of marginalized people. And so this is why I use critical race theory, because it brings this mindfulness to the research. It rejects objectivity, it embraces subjectivity, and you stand on a political basis, political with a small p, not a big P, because there's an understanding and an acceptance that research is never neutral. So one of the things that I think that made an impact on the field was a handbook of race and adult education. And that co-edited book has a lot of different perspectives on teaching about race, on teaching about the social context. And so I just want to recommend that to you. And that is it for me.
Thanks, Juanita. I'm going to spend some time talking about the way that racism, and particularly anti-Black racism, shows up in research broadly, but specifically within HRD. And what I'm going to spend some time discussing is some themes that emerged during our focus sessions at this year's annual conference in Texas, where we invited Black scholars to share their experience of anti-Black racism in the academy. And three, I would say, patterns emerged from the conversations with the scholars around one, erasure, two, extraction, and three, containment. And when I say erasure, I'm speaking to the way that of what occurs when Black intellectual traditions are ignored unless they're validated by dominant frameworks. So many of the scholars in the room talked about how their work was always referenced in relation to other frameworks and not supported as standalone contributions within HRD. And the second theme around extraction is occurs when Black ideas, Black experiences, and with the community are used for data, right? Extractively used for data or diversity capital, but often without any sustained engagement or credit. And then a third theme that emerged was this idea around containment, where the scholars mentioned that it occurs when Black scholars are either siloed into, limited work within the HRD, generally what is framed as DEI work, and are asked to do work around DEI and identity-based work, but then are penalized when they're and seen to be not generalizable or not broadly theoretical. And there were many ways where the scholars said that this showed up in HRD. The first was around gatekeeping. There was a significant conversation around gatekeeping in publications, where Black scholars remain underrepresented in editorial decision-making. spaces, and that Black-centered frameworks are often treated as niche frameworks, asked to justify constantly the legitimacy within HRD, or redirected to other non-sponsored journals within HRD. A second way that this was shared by those in the room was the idea of the experiences of their research being co-opted, right? So this idea of co-opting Black thought, right? So you see where scholars in HRD are using concepts and terms that are specifically grounded in Black epistemology, but then stripping them from their grounding in race and power, decontextualized, sanitized, and repackaged without proper attribution. And then third, an example of how these three themes are showing up in Black scholars' experience in HRD is around epistemic policing. And this is where there's continued privileging of neutral, apolitical, or positive approaches as preferred in HRD, and work that's grounded in lived experiences, particularly Black lived experiences, are often read as like anecdotal or less than theoretical. And then the final experience that was shared is around invisible labor, and that Black scholars are disproportionately engaged in mentoring, service, and institutional representation. And that labor is what is sustaining HRD and is sustaining our institutions and supporting our students, but it's rarely recognized as knowledge production. And the final part of the conversation we had regarding research was around, okay, so what can HRD do? And there were a couple of examples that came up. The first was around citational justice, right? At the individual level, members committed to supporting Black epistemologies need to cite intentionally and expansively, and trace back the origins of their ideas to make sure that they're not co-opting the work of Black scholars. At the relational level, there was recommendations around folks thinking, particularly editors and reviewers, of, am I evaluating this Black scholar's work on their own epistemological terms, or am I forcing this evaluation to be fit into a dominant, more traditional or positive framework? And also thinking about relationally and collaboration, avoiding extractive partnerships, ensuring that Black scholars are shaping and leading works and not just simply included in it as like a third or a fourth co-author. And then finally, I would say at the structural level, there was conversation that HRD needs to move beyond symbolic inclusion. So editorial boards not only need to diversify in forms of representation, but redistribute the decision-making power, and that HRD must expand what counts as theory by legitimizing Black thought, particularly Black feminist thought, care-based methodologies, and community-rooted knowledge. And then we also, as a community, need to revalue labor, recognizing mentoring and the service work that Black scholars do in service to HRD as central knowledge production rather than peripheral service. The overall sentiment in the conversation around research was that Black scholarship offers a diverse set of frameworks for understanding learning, work, care, and power that HRD desperately needs, and that the question is not whether Black scholarship belongs in HRD, but whether HRD is willing to transform enough to fully receive it. And I'll pass it to the next content area.
And I believe that is me. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are logging in from. I'm just going to share a couple of slides, but yes, and to situate myself in the room in terms of my role, I'm taking up the practice banner. And as you see a bit about my background, that might begin to make a bit of sense. So as I'm just setting the context, you can get a bit more of the context. But as a professor of practice, while I do some teaching, some advising, and to some extent, some research, I largely get to benefit from the amazing research that my colleagues and others do. And I spend 50% or more of my time really translating, almost like a clinical professor, almost translating theory to practice. And I do that largely through a 1-year, mainly graduate executive education, one of which is a 1-year executive and organizational coaching program, which attracts mid-career professionals and beyond, and then custom programs that we provide to organizations. So much of what I'm going to talk about is just an example of how we try to embed and integrate these ideas initially of diversity, equity, inclusion. One of the things that we included diversity and leveraging diversity from the very beginning of our coaching program as a core coaching competency. And then during 2020, which we all kind of know a lot of things that were going on then, we deliberately expanded that to add a race and an anti-racism perspective. So you can connect with me via LinkedIn with the QR code if you want the slides. I'll also post a chapter where we use our program as a case to talk about how we operationalize some of these ideas. So, we, from the very beginning in our coaching program, we make explicit that bias is everywhere. And it happens at multiple levels, personal, interpersonal, which is where coaches feel comfortable. But to do the major and important work, we also have to do what I would think of as the more advanced work around structures and dealing with institutional powers and the like. And so because coaches are actually coaching leaders in organizations, they have an ability to really impact, talk about the ripple effect. They have the ability to impact the lives of many. And if they avoid topics of race in particular, then they're, especially when they're coaching Black executives, then it doesn't really provide the safe space for Black executives to bring their whole self to the work. So the way we think about operationalizing anti-racism in coach education for us is really 5 pillars, really a commitment to have historical knowledge, which is really context, have the capabilities to examine bias, not only say that they exist, but know how to recognize them. But that's not even enough, having the capacity to interrupt these inequities. And we think of that as a moral imperative, not just a nice thing to do. So it's really embedded in one of the things that people need to do in order to successfully graduate from our program. And the last 2 pillars we think of as enablers, cultural competence and emotional intelligence, to deal with the emotional triggers that are often associated with this work. We also make it explicit to coaches that we need to move beyond the comfort zone of the golden rule, treating people like putting ourselves in their shoes, to really more empathic accuracy where you're doing it right. And so letting people know that if you want to be comfortable, you're not doing the work. So we have to pass through the fear zone to get to the learning and growth. So you're either proactive or you're being responsive. And so our mandate is really to look at the interplay between the awareness of inequity and practitioner action, and really thinking about those 2 factors is what positions an executive and organizational coach as an active ally as opposed to a spectator. So that is kind of a brief thought about how we take an existing program. Now that's an open enrollment program. Again, it's a year to complete. Again, they're mid-career professionals and beyond. So most people already have, everyone has a bachelor's degree. About 50% of them have master's degrees, and about 25%. And many of them work in or for organizations. So I'll pause there and pass it to my colleague, Shonda, talk about teaching.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I am very interested that the Academy move forward in the area of teaching, which is one area that little work has been done in. So when we had our session at the Academy this year, we did talk about teaching. And some of the things that I brought up was that, like right now, teaching for diversity is highly under attack in higher education. And so, there's been a lot of things going on in different parts of the United States with that. Some of my colleagues, they can no longer teach their courses. There's been a lot of scrubbing of syllabi and certain books you can't use. You have to change the name. And there's a lot of funding cut for federal funding for diversity. So my understanding around this is that the academy is a primary place for us to pick up the slack in the area of teaching. Because one, we're not receiving federal funding. Two, we have a lot of doctoral students that are doing research in the area of DEI and social justice. And so they're in the middle of their dissertations and master's work right now. So, they're kind of feeling like, am I going to be able to use this? Am I going to be able to get a job in this area? And so, I feel that, we can't let federal government stop us from teaching. I mean, my personal view is that I don't tell them how to govern. They shouldn't tell me how to teach. But I do believe that, we do need this teaching because we're teaching diverse society. People want to know about what their culture is contributing, what some of the things that they have done to help the world to be a better place. So my thinking is that, we need to open the door and have more programming in the Academy of Human Research Development that talks about diverse teaching in social justice and anti-racism, because these are areas that have been highly overlooked in education. But higher education has gladly taken, money and admitted people into these programs. And they have to select from areas that maybe they're really not interested in, but really could make an impact. I do believe that the Academy of Human Resource Development is a primary place for this, because we do have scholars there that have already done extensive work in this area that are very active today. So again, we do have the teaching experience there for that. And, hopefully in future conferences, we will see more opportunities for discussion around DEI teaching and how HRD can be a primary resource to further that. Does any of the other panelists want to chime in about teaching? Their experience.
Marilyn, you're muted.
Okay, go ahead.
Marilyn.
I was talking and realized nobody could hear me. I want to just circle back to, since we have a little bit of time, I want to circle back to talk about theory. Y'all, we actually attempted to have this discussion during a special invitation. It was a special invitation to the anti-racism committee during the 2023 Town Hall Forum. We were invited to talk or to be panelists for a forum that focused on transforming HRD research. Unfortunately, our voices were silenced. So this is an opportunity to revisit how we were going to contribute to that conversation in transforming HRD research and theory. So first of all, I believe we can all agree that the interdisciplinary nature of HRD means that we do draw from relevant theories. And, Swanson's three-legged stool is still very, very popular in HRD education, in textbooks, and how students are learning about theory, which is fine. I'm not questioning that. That certainly his drawing on economics and psychology and systems definitely exemplifies an interdisciplinary focus. However, y'all, I questioned Swanson's application of systems theory, as it has not strongly emphasized the social systems as a subset of the organization systems. So the problem is that Swanson's application of systems theory is aimed more at representing the performative nature of an organization, and the organization, of course, being the system, and really looking how all parts work together to benefit an organization. I do support systems theory, and I support it because not necessarily his approach, but I support the opportunity to expose a racialized social system, which Swanson's approach covers up the social system, and how a racialized social system produces anti-Black racism and all other forms of racism, really, for that matter, and how the social systems, the racialized social system, presents a threat to the system as a whole. So, if we're looking at systems theory and we're just looking at it as a way to perform, for our people to perform better, for the organization to be in a more competitive position, but at the same time, we're overlooking social problems, that in itself is a problem. Now, anti-Black racism, which is the focus of our session today, is an egregious social problem that emanates from this racialized social system. I've always tried to, in my research, try to show how when we're covering up problems, that's a race neutral mindset. It's like we're, everything's the same, race neutral, but race is real, and it's presenting a problem. The problem being anti-Black racism, being silenced. So is it realistic to think that racism is not posing a threat to the system? So kind of as a sum up and to kind of put together how theory and research informs practice and teaching, as a collective, we are pushing to advance theory by using a soft systems approach and critically applying research and theory to explain social reality in practice and in teaching. So that's sort of a summative of race-based epistemologies and how we feel like our contributions have been important, but they have been overlooked. Now, before we turn it over to the audience, I do want to sort of bring a little bit more to the table about, just a minute. Sorry.
While you're looking for that, Marilyn,
Okay.
I just wanted to echo from a practitioner's perspective what you just said about open systems and systems approach. Realistically, systems that are designed by a particular group is often developed in their own interest. So you can't really expect the actual system that created the issue to resolve it, right? And so even with whether that's the Academy of Human Resource Development, partially why this anti-racism committee was created and the context, or whether that's a university or whether that's a corporation. I mean, even within the academy, you actually have to go after the systems. And this is why we try to make that really explicit to coaches. It's not good enough to simply want to do the right thing. You actually have to go after the systems that are driving that behavior. And in the academy, it's awards, it's publications and books. I'm talking about HRD, right? And so if you don't go after those systems, then we're just talking. And I think that's one of the things that the committee has really tried to do, and with Laura and other leadership, to really go after some of those systems. And it takes a while. So I just want to echo your point about the critique of Swanson's work in terms of systems thinking, but you have to look at those systems critically and understand what they were created to do.
And I wasn't talking about systems theory, particularly in just applying it to the HRD. I was talking about applying systems theory into the whole field of human resource development. We're not the only people doing human resource development. Human resource development is anywhere people are engaging in developing people, y'all. So thank you for that perspective, Terry. But I wasn't just talking about the HRD. So y'all please understand my position there. Okay, so
I understand that. I was just using the academy as an example.
okay.
Definitely, just to be
Okay.
clear about what I was trying to respond to.
Okay, so and I responded and gave my position as well. So y'all, here's a few we thought we would share our let me see if I can find it. Oops. So we thought we'd highlight some of the contributions of Black intellectuals to the AHRD, because if we don't tell it, it won't be told. So some notable first, and when I'm saying first, I'm talking about Black African American folks in the AHRD. Dr. Terry Maltbia, the recipient of the Dissertation of the Year, 2001. Dr. Fred Nafuko, he was a member of the executive HRD board for 2007 to 2010. Dr. Clarita Hughes, recipient of Book of the Year Award 2012. Dr. Marilyn Byrd, first Black editor-in-chief of the HRD, 2018-2025, then renaming of a journal award in 2022 to represent Dr. Byrd's dedication to the journal. Dr. Stephanie Cisco, recipient Early Career Scholar 2024. Dr. Tamika Greer, president-elect of the AHRD 2026. Then we have some other special recognitions we'd like to shout out. Dr. Scott and her colleagues, well, Anthony Scott is her brother, Dr. Charles Crutchfield. Dr. Scott, you want to talk about this? Because I think there's a documentary that goes with this.
Yeah, well, in 2020, I'm working with the nonprofit in my hometown, Another Family, to kind of highlight what African American success looks like. And so we did a book that built off my father's work in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's called Minnesota's Black Community in the 21st Century. And so we submitted it to the Academy for the Book of the Year award through the Minnesota Historical Society. And it's a untraditional book. It's not like a reading book. It's a book of people in various professions, which speaks to HRD and highlighted what work they're doing in various fields. Anyway, the book ended up getting Book of the Year in 2020 from the Academy of Human Resource Development. And then from that, now we did a documentary that's built off that book to put it in a digital format. That came out in 2025. And we're so fortunate that we're going to Martha's Vineyard this year to the African American Film Festival to show the documentary in August of 2026. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Scott. And y'all, that also shows how our work in anti-racism and showing the contributions of the legacy of Black folks. I think this whole idea, I know a point of it begins with Dr. Scott's father and his contributions in their local community, and how we're giving back and showing our contributions in building communities. So I think our work in not only in the field, but how we, are trying to make differences in the communities that we reside. Then Dr. Juanita Johnson Bailey, a renowned scholar, educator, and researcher of race and gender. She was an invited panelist for the first HRD Town Hall Forum. Y'all, that was a forum where we actually called out racism and we challenged the master narrative in HRD. And if I'm correct, Dr. Juanita, after that, joined the HRD. So she's still doing important work in the anti-racism committee. Then Dr. Byrd, Dr. Scott, and Dr. Greer are recipients of the Laura Bierman Excellence in Critical HRD award recipients for that award. Then recently, I think this was this year's conference, I believe. I think I'm right. The Elwood Houghton Research Excellence Award went to Dr. Nicole Dillard. Y'all, that's a journal award and given to the best article in the volume for that year. So congratulations to all of our Black intellectuals who are doing important work in the Academy of Human Resource Development. So now we do have some time to take questions from the audience. So are there any questions or comments? Or does any of the panelists want to add more to the conversation? Now, come on, y'all. Somebody has something to say, I know.
I just have
Shannon has her hand raised.
Oh, where is Shonda? Where are you?
Shannon.
Oh, yes. I'm so sorry.
No
I'm looking
problem.
all over the screen and okay, Shannon,
Yes, ma'am.
please ask.
I had the pleasure of meeting you at the conference this year. I appreciate all that you all do. My name is Shannon. I'm sorry. I'm a PhD student in the HRD program at UT Tyler. And
Mhm.
I'm so excited to have been able to join you all today. I appreciate all that you do and that you are speaking out. It is a very enlightening, encouraging, all the things. To be able to hear people that look like me be able to voice concerns and really get the message out. So I just want to say thank you for all that you all do.
And you know what, Shannon, what we're doing is we're trying to pass the baton to you younger folks, so you can keep passing it on. That's the only way, y'all. It's the only way we're gonna affect change is to keep lifting each other up and passing the torch. So so we appreciate that you could attend our webinar today and keep up your good work. When are you graduating? You said you're a candidate?
Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am, I'm a student still. I'm
You
just
still okay.
about to finish the first year of studies. So the coursework should be finished next year, and then I'll get on to writing a lot.
Look, it's just a process, okay? It's a process with an end, okay?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
I
ma'am.
think Dr. Robert Martin had a question or a comment. See, I'm echoing. Hmm. Robert.
Thank you so much. This has been really, really enlightening and encouraging. I have the honor and distinction of being a colleague with Dr. Scott at Oakland University, and she continues to be a wonderful colleague, friend, and mentor. I did want to ask the initial speaker if she could elaborate a little bit more on the need of an empathetic perspective in research. I found that interesting because I think that we are experiencing a crisis of empathy in our society right now. But so I'm coming from a biased perspective with my thoughts, but I just wondered if she could elaborate a bit.
Well, both the frameworks that I use in my research, especially Black feminist thought, has a tenet that says an ethic of care. And it talks about the importance of respect and the importance of coming to your research with an understanding of the cultural context. And so often when you look at just research in general, it comes with a lens of objectivity, but that objectivity is operationalized differently depending on what the research is about or who the research is about. And that is something that needs to be called out and that people need to be aware of. I remember one of my professors did a study on in health services, and she looked in particular at the samples. One of the big studies that she looked at talked about the sexual habits of of young women. They were looking 18 to 23. And she drilled down on a sample. Well, the white women that were young women that were sampled were in the Northeast quarter in college. The Black women and women of color that were sampled, they went to the health department. And so the study came out looking like that Black and brown girls were more sexually active, and the white women in the Northeast quarter in these elite schools were not. Well, you're talking about social capital. And so the young white girls said no. And the brown and Black girls, what could they say when they were at the health department and they were there for birth control services? So she drilled down to show the illusion of objectivity and how there was no empathetic lens looking at and assessing these people. Does that make sense, Robert?
Completely. Thank you.
Thank you.
See, I see Felicia. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I know. I just keep talking, and I
Oh,
think you can read my lips.
okay.
Dr. Scott.
So then this is a HCD program, graduating in 2023. As a more new HCD, HRD practitioner scholar, what advice can you give us so that we can get more involved in AHRD and to kind of help make a change in the organization over time?
Felicia, can you ask that question again? Because I had gotten distracted because I didn't hear the first part.
For scholar practitioners in the field of AHRD, what advice would you give us in terms of being engaged, how we can get engaged in the organization so that we could be a part of helping to get the, make things change over time?
So you're asking to engage in your own organization?
Not just our own organization, just AHRD as a whole. And we as individuals get more engaged in the organization, the academy, to make a difference.
Well, one way you can do that is joining the anti-racism committee. You're a member of HRD, right? Yeah, you are. So there's going to be a call that's going to be going out for members, new members that are interested in joining the anti-racism committee. So that definitely is one way to be involved. And so be looking for that announcement to come out in the May Digest.
And then also she could get involved with the Black SIG. If you haven't joined, please do so, because Dr. Bird and I will be sending out a Zoom link this week to connect with the new Black SIG, which has started this year.
Yeah, I don't know if Terry wants to add something too, because it seemed like the question also was around like practitioners, right, being more involved in HRD. And I think, Shonda's point around joining the Black SIG, as we think about, our priorities for the coming years, a lot of this is around things we can do more in HRD. And two of those is, as Shonda talked about, how do we think about being more intentional about teaching and training our students around teaching. But the other part too is around how do we do more to bridge practice. And so having more scholar practitioners participate in the Black SIG will help us lead that agenda of making sure we're strengthening the connections between what we're doing theoretically and to what's happening live in practice.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And building on what everyone else has said, I think, Felicia, in addition to the Black SIG and importantly the Anti-Racism Committee, going back to this notion of structures and the systems, a lot of the changes, and they're slow. Anyone who's worked in a majority organization knows that this doesn't get done overnight. But I think having a liaison on the board, so we're focusing on, there's some initiatives now on practitioners, and that's in part because there's a couple of board members that are really trying to push that agenda forward. Now I'm going to call that practitioner with a big P. And yet, I think our work in terms of is making sure that there's an anti-racism perspective as that practitioner orientation work is going up. And so both having a committee, having an anti-racism committee, and having a board liaison, I think really puts us in a position to do that work. Isn't that right, Madam President Tamika?
And that is correct.
And you know what, y'all, we, the Anti-Racism Committee, in particular, we owe a lot to past President Laura Bierman for even giving us the opportunity to have this committee formed. She responded to Dr. Scott, and from there, conversations were held, and here we are. And I believe I can candidly say that we have made an impact. And I'm not saying that our contributions have not been noticed, but I think, based on as Terry called them, the artifacts of this HRD, I think there's a lot that still needs to be done. But we're not letting that deter us from doing the work. We have to do the work. If we don't do it, it won't get done. So we push forward, and we push forward, believing that we will leave a legacy. And as I told Shannon, is she still here? Where are you? Where are you, Shannon? You and young folks that like you will continue to drive our mission. And we thank y'all. So, are there any other comments that anybody wants to make? Well, if nothing else, I'm going to say have a pleasant afternoon, and we hope to see you in our next webinar.
Thank you all.
Bye.
All right, thank you.